All right, Beastcoast Pokemon. Today, me and Aaron are here to talk about our top 5 restricted duos that we have picked for Series 12. We think that these are the current top 5 strongest pairs in the current Series 12 format as of this moment. And yeah, we're going to be talking about why they're good, the common partners that they have, and how to beat them and what are their potential weaknesses.
Yeah, James and I are super excited to do this, and of course we're looking to make as much cool competitive Pokemon content on the Beastcoast Pokemon channel. So let us know what you think about this kind of content, what you want to see from us in the future, and yeah, if you could drop a like and subscribe to the channel, it would also be greatly appreciated. I'm really excited to be working on all of this great content with James, and so yeah, thank you so much for watching, and let's just jump right into things. For the first couple of pairs that we're going to talk about, we don't really have them ranked in any specific order. We think that they're all kind of interchangeable and they're all, just within some of the strongest ones. And so the order here doesn't really matter. But the first one that we have on our list is Zacian plus Groudon. James, what do you think about Zacian and Groudon?
I think Zacian and Groudon, it was a pretty popular duo, especially in the beginning of Series 12. We saw it quite a bit. It has kind of died down a little bit as others have been kind of more explored. But Zacian and Groudon is very threatening. Of course, Groudon with the sun, absolutely huge because there's been a lot of great pairs for Groudon, especially the partners in Venusaur and Charizard, which are really threatening with the max moves. The max moves with the Vine Lash and the Wildfire chip, absolutely insane. Their damage output is already crazy, and then you basically screw up a lot of damage calcs where there's some Pokemon that are easy to survive, like Behemoth Blade from Zacian, but that basically gets thrown out the window because of the Wildfire or the Vine Lash chip, which is really significant in a lot of matches. So that's also a thing. And yeah, it's just like really strong because you have like really good partners. Charizard can get like airstreams. It's really good against opposing Zacian, and Groudon's just really solid with Zacian because it is one of the few Pokemon that can actually KO a opposing Zacian with Max Quake and survive that Behemoth Blade and take it pretty comfortably actually. So that is one thing that's really good about this duo. Common partners include like Regieleki, Grimmsnarl, Incineroar, Venusaur, Charizard. Those are probably some of the common pairs you'll see with the Zacian Groudon combination. And then how to beat it, I guess I would say it kind of struggles against well-played Kyogre. Of course, you are going to be playing Weather Wars, but Zacian and Groudon don't exactly have the means to one-hit KO Kyogre, and Kyogre can really fire off a lot of damage. Knockout of Groudon always has the ability to change weather with max moves, and does really hurt the Zacian as well, especially a Max Geyser and Rain can just OHKO a Zacian, for instance, and it does resist a Behemoth Blade. And opposing Venusaur can be pretty annoying. There's Sleep Powder involved, there's Weather Ball as well. Max Flare really threatens the Zacian, and of course the Vine Lash can really screw up the calcs as well, and also just really hits the Groudon for a lot of damage, especially since a lot of Groudons don't carry fire type moves in this generation. And then finally, the Calyrex-Shadow Rider is a Pokemon that's a little bit difficult for this duo because of the fact that it is pretty fast. It's faster than both of these, and then can go for like Will-O-Wisp, which can really significantly decrease their damage output. So that is one thing to really be aware of with this duo, but it is still really strong at the end of the day. Let's get on to our next pair. Aaron, why not tell us about Zacian plus Yveltal?
Yeah, this one's definitely interesting because Yveltal back in the previous restricted formats, not exactly the most consistent Pokemon, right? It felt like Yveltal actually beat everything outside of Zacian, but Zacian being the most common Pokemon in all the other restricted formats and also in this one made it a lot more difficult, especially as some Zacians started teching Play Rough, right? And that's a pretty common move on it these days. And so the nice thing about Yveltal in Series 12 is that you can support it with a lot of good attackers, and you can have your own Zacian on the team as well. And so suddenly it's not like you're giving up one restricted slot to use Yveltal, like previous formats, right? In this format, like you do have the Yveltal, but you can also support it with another restricted Pokemon. And so I think it's substantially stronger now, and partially it's because Yveltal is still really good against a lot of the other common picks. Calyrex-Shadow Rider, for example, you just threaten with Sucker Punch. Groudon, you threaten with Foul Play. Kyogre, you can threaten with Snarl. And even opposing Zacians, you can threaten with the Foul Play and deal, 30-40% as it switches in. And so Yveltal is definitely stronger now, and Zacian is just such a common partner for it because, I mean, it is just still the best restricted Pokemon in the format. So this is a strong duo, and you are definitely going to have to worry a little bit still about opposing Zacians, especially if they carry a Play Rough, right? Because Yveltal can just get one-shot by it, and Yveltal's damage output still wasn't really amazing into opposing Zacians. Regieleki and Thundurus are also two Pokemon that can cause some problems here because, Max Lightning just does a absurd amount of damage into Yveltal, and, they can also get pretty good speed control. Yveltal is in that weird speed tier where it's not super slow, but it's also not super fast compared to some of the really fast Pokemon that you're going to run into in the format. But overall, I think one reason why this duo is compelling is because Yveltal is a Pokemon that can actually last in the field for a good amount of time, especially because it gets access to Oblivion Wing, right? So that allows it to heal up for a good amount of its health. And unlike a lot of the other Pokemon here that don't have really great sustain, Yveltal is a Pokemon that can last on the field for a very long time, even when it's going up against really powerful, super effective attacks. And so it's about protecting your Yveltal and also deciding whether or not you want to Dynamax it, because it can be a very, very good Dynamax option. Talking about common partners here, you've got a bunch. I think getting screens up is really valuable since Yveltal is already really bulky, and so it just makes it even more difficult to knock out. And so you often will see like Clay Grimmsnarl paired with this combo, as well as potentially Lapras, for example, with that G-Max Resonance, Gigantamax Lapras specifically. Other common partners that I think we've seen include Pokemon like Rotom Heat, Pokemon like Gastrodon, Pokemon like Landorus, and some of the Pokemon that we've talked about previously, Incineroar, Regieleki. These are just staples really to any team in the format. Amoonguss also really valuable in redirecting some of those attacks away from Yveltal, as it really still doesn't love going up against super effective attacks. So yeah, generally I think this is a bulkier core, and Yveltal specifically is one of the bulkiest restricteds that is viable at the moment. And so yeah, that wraps it up for Zacian plus Yveltal. James, why don't you tell us about the next one?
All right, next we got Groudon plus Calyrex-Shadow Rider, which we've seen a few here and there. Groudon's Calyrex-Shadow Rider is definitely probably one of the least used out of this list, but me and Aaron think that it is still a really strong duo, especially with the strong spread moves in Astral Barrage and Precipice Blades, which is really good. As the same with Zacian plus Groudon. Groudon, of course, Sun Partners, Venusaur, Charizard, the Wildfire, Vine Lash, does an absolutely insane amount of damage. And it's a Pokemon that, again, can really handle Zacian really well. This duo is actually exceptional against Zacian because you have your Calyrex-Shadow Rider. A lot of them carry like Wisp, for instance, and that can slow down Zacian damage output, which makes Groudon pretty insane. And I think the partners for Groudon Calyrex-Shadow Rider, what makes it really great here as potential options, Venusaur with Sleep Powder is super solid. For instance, you could lead Groudon Venusaur, and if you know they're a Lumberry and they're going to like Lumberry Thundurus, for instance, for Dynamax, you can actually switch out the Groudon into your Calyrex-Shadow Rider and go for Sleep Powder and basically have them waste a Dynamax even though they have a Lumberry, because Calyrex's ability prevents the eating of the Lumberries. So I think that's like really cool. The Vine Lash and the Wildfire damage can also just like really wear down opponent's team and weaken them, so Calyrex can maybe finish them off and then gain the boost as well. So common partners we see are usually like Regieleki for some speed control. We definitely see Venusaur and Charizard on them, but we've also seen some defensive takes, for instance, with like Gastrodon, which definitely does make some sense, and Thundurus for potential speed control. Sometimes they'll be the Defiant set, sometimes they'll be the supporter set with Prankster, but those are really common partners with this duo. And then I'd say what gives this duo some difficulty is Incineroar is a little bit annoying because of the Intimidate factor. It can slow down the Groudon. Groudon usually can't one-shot Incineroar unless it's like a boosted item with Max Quake. And then Incineroar can always be a switch into Calyrex-Shadow Rider, so it can be a little bit difficult. Yveltal, this team kind of struggles to hit Yveltal, and if you're trying to boost up the Groudon to hit the Yveltal with like a Swords Dance into a Rock Fall, Yveltal can always threaten with the Foul Play, which makes it a little bit awkward. And then Shadow Rider Mirrors can also be a little bit strange because it does usually carry Willis for Groudon, while the Astral Barrage just really threatens the Calyrex. And if you lose the Speed type potentially or the Speed War, it can be really dangerous on your side. So that is Groudon plus Calyrex-Shadow Rider. But before we go into what we think are the top two pairs of the Series 12 Restricteds, we decided we would give our own opinions on what are our wildcard picks, I suppose, that we think are really underexplored but have a lot of potential in this series. So Aaron, why not talk about your first wild card?
Yeah, for me, I think I've really got my eye out on Solgaleo plus Kyogre. As of right now, I think most of the more common duos in the format are Zacian plus, just another really strong restricted. But I'm really intrigued by Solgaleo plus Kyogre because, one, I think Solgaleo is just kind of underrated, has a really good matchup into a lot of the common restricteds at the moment, especially Zacian. I feel like Zacian just can't really deal that much to Solgaleo, and Solgaleo can Dynamax and then just, retaliate back with the Max Quake. And I like the Kyogre pairing because it reduces kind of the weakness from Fire-type attacks, and, you are going to run into a lot of Fire-type Pokemon in the format at the moment, Pokemon like Incineroar or Charizard, for example, and, of course, Groudon can run Fire-type attacks as well. And so it kind of, patches up the weakness a little bit. And, you know, I think Solgaleo, especially with the weakness policy, it's a combo that we've seen previously, is just really, really a good Dynamax option. And I like this pairing, especially because I think with these duos, Kyogre often ends up not maxing as much. And that makes sense because you almost always want to Dynamax Solgaleo, at least in my experience playing with it. And so I think it's kind of underexplored at the moment. And I am just a big fan of it because I think Solgaleo in general is kind of slept on, and Kyogre is one of the best partners for it. But James, what is your pick here?
So I guess we have a similar thought process because we were talking about Solgaleo Kyogre earlier. However, I had a little bit of a different approach. I actually think that Dialga plus Kyogre has a lot of potential possibilities right now, especially since Dialga, it's a weird restricted where we've only really seen Dialga and Zacian do pretty well recently, especially on like the high ladder of like Battle Stadium and Showdown. However, I feel like Dialga is a fantastic max, especially with the right speed control. And then I think with Kyogre can really be threatening as well. I think that Kyogre threatens the Zacian, which can give Dialga a little bit of trouble because of the Sacred Sword, ignoring like Steel Spike boost. But I feel like the same reason for Solgaleo plus Kyogre, the same can apply to Dialga plus Kyogre, where you can get boost, where you're usually going for max Quake and max Steel Spikes, dishing out a lot of damage. I think it's really nice for the Kyogre, and I really do like the Dialga because it's good against opposing Kyogres, which is nice. It's good against like Regielekis because it actually is able to resist the Electric type move, which I really like. And of course, just does a lot of damage in general and can really do a lot of damage to like Zacian and a lot of other common restricteds. So I think it's a really strong pair. You have a lot of options too with like Trick Room or like fast mode with like Tailwind. There's a lot of ways you could probably go with this duo. So that's why I think it is probably one of the potential possibilities of a really good restricted pair in this format that people are sleeping on. But enough with our wild cards. Why not we get into what we think are the top 2 restricted pairs of this format currently? And I guess we'll start with Aaron with Zacian plus the Calyrex-Shadow Rider.
Yeah, and I think one thing I want to quickly add before we go into our final 2 pairs is I think the cool thing about Series 12 is we haven't even talked about combos like Palkia plus Zacian or Kyurem White plus Zacian, and those are actually duos that actually had won tournaments as well, right? So it goes to show that you don't necessarily need to use one of these top 5 cores in order to do very well in this format. These are just the top 5 that we listed because they're the ones that we see more frequently and the ones that perform more consistently. So don't let that be kind of scare you away from trying out some of the other duos that you might want to try out in Series 12, because truthfully I think it's actually a very deep format and you can explore way beyond the top 5. But as James mentioned, one of our top 2 picks and coming at number 2 is going to be Zacian plus Calyrex-Shadow Rider. This duo is really all about speed. You're very, very fast. It's 2 of the just fastest Pokemon in the format outright, and the kind of goal is to just overwhelm your opponent with offense, right, and try to KO them before they can even get an attack off. What's interesting about this duo is that, Zacian obviously can't Dynamax, and Calyrex-Shadow Rider is actually not exactly the best Dynamax option because you normally want to use those spread type attacks, and so these teams will often be paired with a lot of Pokemon that can be strong Dynamax options. For example, Blastoise is one, Zapdos is one. I've seen even like Tornadus, for example, where Tornadus can go for Dynamax for max Airstreams while also pressuring with something like Tailwind. And so, yeah, you're going to want a lot of strong max options because Calyrex-Shadow Rider, preferably shouldn't be a max option unless you really, really need it to be. So ways that you can, counter this duo, first of all, Incineroar in itself, obviously one of the best Pokemon in the format, but can also give this duo specifically some trouble because it's actually really good offensively against both, and like a Dynamax Incin can, potentially one-shot Zacian, not take much damage from Calyrex, and also one-shot the Calyrex, and so Incin itself is going to be a problem. Speed control from opposing sides, dropping your speed so that you can't move first is going to be a problem, right? So Regieleki with Electro Web can always be tricky. This is a duel that's also really, really fast, and so I think often Trick Room modes can be potentially really, really tough to go up against, and so there are some restricted Pokemon that can Trick Room. Something like Dialga, for example, is really intriguing, where the most amount of damage you'll take is probably from a close combat from Zacian, but you can survive that, and yeah, if you're Dynamax, you can also decrease Zacian's attack via max Wormwind to its partners and increase your defense via max Steel Spike, and so yeah, ultimately, I think like this is a duel that really likes to overwhelm you with offense and, tries to win games quickly. It's often a little bit more hyper offensive, and so having a way to either slow them down or allow you to move first, i.e. Trick Room, can be really valuable. And that leads us to our number 1 pick, James.
All right, so I was known back in the day of 2019 when we had 2 restrictions for Xerneas and Kyogre, and this duo probably surpasses that by quite far. We have Zacian plus Kyogre, which is just an absolutely insane duo when you think about it. They are both really powerful, like Water Spout in the rain. Behemoth Blade with the attack boost is just absolutely incredible. The Zacian, of course, with the steel typing, its only weaknesses are going to be fire and ground, which Kyogre does hit super effectively against both of them. It's absolutely insane, scares away Incineroars, and it's just really flexible as a duo because there's so many different ways you could use this pair with Trick Room, with Tailwind. There's like so many balanced versions you could make with this team. It has a lot of good partners that synergize extremely well, because you could go with, like, there are multiple grass types that help. Like, you could run Rillaboom, you could run Kartana, you can run Amoonguss, and then there's like a bunch of electric types like Regieleki, Thundurus, Zapdos. There's so many Pokemon you can pair with this, and they'll just fit well. You can go with Screen's bulky, you could go with like Tailwind Offense. There's so many different modes that you can just pair, and you can have multiple of them on the same team. It's just absolutely insane, like how well that these Pokemon, I think, pair together. And yeah, again, there's just way too many common partners that you could just list here that is just would be an insane list. I think this synergizes with the most Pokemon out there of any restricted duo. And for like probably the ways that you handle it, it really depends on the build, but something that gives the duo usually a lot of trouble are like Regieleki is a big one, and potentially Zapdos. But Regieleki, of course, that outspeeds both of these Pokemon and can really fire off a really strong Max Lightning, is really scary for these Pokemon because Max Lightning does a ton of damage, can threaten to knock out Kyogre, of course, so that's something you do have to watch out for. Weather Wars are a little bit annoying because Groudon, Venusaur are one of the big ones, especially Groudon with just like support with like Venusaur, Charizard, can really technically just overwhelm this if the Kyogre is not able to get the knockouts, and then they're able to fire back because Fine Lash damage is going to add up as well, Wildfire too. So it can be a little bit difficult, especially if the Kyogre gets slowed down damage output wise. And then finally, this duo does kind of struggle against Dialga because even though that you could hit the Dialga with Sacred Sword as well, it can be a little bit troubling to get that Sacred Sword off as Dialga is able to threaten Kyogre and Zacian, especially with Dynamax. Same reason for Palkia as well. Palkia is able to dish out a lot of damage, especially if your Zacian's not running Play Rough on this core, as Palkia can just like absorb the water spouts easily from the Kyogre and then really threaten the Zacian, especially with a Max Geyser and Rain, which will do a ton of damage. But it is still a really strong duo, and I think we did have to rank it as like one of our top 2 at least restricted duos in the entire format.
Yeah, for sure. I think like the thing with the top 2 here is that they're just really, really consistent in my opinion. I think like Groudon's a Pokemon that I actually personally really love in just all the restricted formats, especially because as a Dynamax option, you know, you can get rid of the shaky accuracy from Precipice Blades. But the reliance on Precipice Blades in itself is what makes it really scary to use. And I think the other thing about Groudon is you're often pairing it with Pokemon that, you know, take advantage of the sun, right? So Charizard and Venusaur. Venusaur is an incredibly good Pokemon, but I think it can also be a Pokemon that can bait you a little bit, especially with, you know, Sleep Powder. And so I think, you know, it is a Pokemon that can be a little bit more inconsistent, especially if you fall into the mindset of, you know, using Sleep Powder and using Precipice Blades, especially in situations where you might not necessarily have to rely on them. And so for that reason, like, the Groudon pairs weren't as high. I could easily see Groudon winning events, right? But I think Zacian and Kyogre are just so consistent, like James mentioned, so many different combinations that you can really pair it with. And yeah, same with Zacian and Calyrex, where it's just really fast paced. And in a restricted format like this, you know, you can really, really punish your opponents heavily with just one really good turn. And I feel like the top 2 duos we talked about overall just really have that kind of pure strength. But I will say, James, I don't know about your experience, but when I was using Zacian and Kyogre, I did struggle a little bit against the Groudon Calyrex teams that I went up against. And similarly, when I used Groudon Calyrex, I was like, hey, Zacian and Kyogre is actually not a terrible matchup, especially because you have Weather Control and Calyrex can outspeed them. Astro Barrage, you know, does good damage to both. And then a lot of Calyrex is now also pressure with Will-O-Wisp onto Zacian. So that's one of the reasons why I think we included that combo within this top 5 list.
Yeah, there are quite a few counterplays. I think it really just depends on the build specifically. It's really like comes down to partners, right? Because I think like all these duos have different ways you can build around. You could go like an offensive mode, you can go with like a bulky screens route. I think it really just depends on like, because it, like for instance, a Zacian Kyogre into Zacian Groudon matchup can go like so many different ways depending on your partners, especially like, do they have a Gastrodon, do they have a Venusaur? What exactly is your ways to handle the Weather War? What are your switch-ins? I think that's really important. And I think like the 5 restricted duos that we have here have so many different partners, especially, and different ways that you could use the restricted duo to utilize its strengths. So I think that leads it to just very volatile matchups where even if you know like, oh, you're facing this duo, it can go completely different depending on what the sets are.
For sure, for sure. And so that is going to wrap up our tier list. Our general goal with this video is to, one, help educate you if you haven't really kept up with Series 12 very much. Two, just give some opinions on what we think can be good. And three, also, offer some potential solutions if you're struggling against the top 5. But like we've mentioned, there are plenty of different ways you can play in Series 12. There are plenty of duos that we didn't even touch on that have won tournaments as well. Those are just maybe a little bit less common, but I do think that these are going to be the ones that you're going to run into on the ladder the majority of the time. So yeah, this is something that we hope you enjoy. It's our first time doing it, so would really appreciate any feedback for both myself and James, what you like to see from this kind of video, what you'd like to see us improve on, and yeah, how you'd like to see us approach it in the future. So really appreciate y'all for watching. And James, any final words?
Yeah, I'm excited, especially if regionals do come back. I'm kind of curious on how players are going to adjust, what kind of restricted duos they're going to use, and see maybe different variants of what we're currently seeing on Lotto right now and how it will evolve over time. I'm really curious on if these 5 will be able to stay the top 5, even though Zacian's really good. Will we see more counterplay, for instance, and will we see other restricted duos just pop up out there and really just take big wins, because you kind of know what to expect from the restricted duos at the top already. But yeah, if you want to see more content from us, make sure you subscribe to the channel for the Beastcoast Pokemon, subscribe to our individual channels, especially since we do a lot of VGC Series 12 ourselves, and let us know what kind of content you want to see from us in the future. If you have any suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. But again, thank you for joining me, Aaron, and thank you all for watching.